Kia ora koutou, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the third webinar in Ekos's BioCredita series. Ko Josh Lanehauers toko ingoa. My name is Josh Lanehauers. I'm a carbon analyst here at Ekos, and once again I'll be guiding you through today's webinar. Having previously focused on buyers of biodiversity credits, on this occasion we will turn our attention to potential suppliers. And the key question on people's minds will be, can this be a funding mechanism for our particular conservation projects? So to help unpack this, we are privileged to have Dr. Sean Weaver, our CEO at Ekos, and Helen Hughes, Tai Urungi, Chief Executive of Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, with us again today. Now, for those who are just getting up to speed with the topic, note that BioCredita is a biodiversity credits program developed by Ekos to help fund biodiversity conservation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Before we proceed, a couple of admin comments to share. This webinar is being recorded to be made available later to all who have registered, and will also be made available on the Ekos website. We'll start with hearing from Sean and Helen first, and then we'll move on to questions from you, the webinar participants. So feel free to start posting questions in the Q&A chat, which you'll find below. Note you may upload questions if you like existing ones, and then we'll prioritize answering these. We'll begin with Sean to give us an overview of the BioCredita program establishment process. We'll then move into a conversation looping in Helen to learn about Sanctuary Mountain's experience, it being the inaugural project. A quick note that we received about 90 plus questions at the BioCredita launch webinar, which was our first one. Many of which we did not have time to cover in that particular webinar, and we have prepared written answers to these questions and we'll send them to all webinar participants. We'll do the same thing again for today's webinar. These questions and answers will also be lodged in the frequently asked questions section of our Ekos website. So Sean, can you please provide an outline of the BioCredita program, please?
Thank you, Josh, and welcome everyone. Good to see you, Helen, as well. So what I'll do is I'll do a screen share and race us through a presentation explaining the BioCredita program from a project development perspective. And I'll do that with a screen share now. And just let me know if that's up and running. You can see that.
Looks good, Sean.
Good. Okay, so let's have a look. A really important thing to acknowledge and to be understood from the beginning is that BioCredita is not a source of money. We don't have money. We're not going to buy biodiversity credits from Sanctuary Mountain, Maungatautari or any other project. What we are is a new net to go fishing, to help you go fishing for money with a new tool in your financing toolbox. So let's just be very, very clear on that. Now, globally, there are a number of initiatives calling for major increases in biodiversity conservation and biodiversity conservation financing. This includes the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Global Trends in Environmental, Social and Governance Reporting, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. To get a sense of the financing gap, according to the coming Montreal Protocol Secretariat, the biodiversity financing gap is between 700 billion and 900 billion US dollars annually. And this is globally way too much for philanthropy and taxpayers to afford. The same is true in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as a result, international organisations have made it clear that there needs to be a creative way to finance biodiversity conservation and sustainable development that isn't limited to philanthropy and governments, but is a bit broader than that. And the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Global Action Compact for Investing in Sustainable Development have prepared a framework for this. And in particular, a key part of that framework is enabling innovative financing and reorienting financial markets. Fundamentally, this is about bringing in private sector financing to this space. and this is to help bridge the financing gap. Again, this is also true in this country. We've got far more biodiversity conservation needs than we have philanthropic money and government money to support it, and a lot of that is on private land. Now, when private sector financing is involved, the private sector wants to get what they pay for and get value for money, and for this it's really important to have a measurement, reporting and verification program, or at least it helps an awful lot if there's a strong measurement, reporting and verification framework. And this is the underpinnings of the BioCredita program. The measurement, reporting and verification framework and infrastructure that we have in the BioCredita program is a standard, methodologies, validation and verification protocols, a registry, and transparent pricing. I mean, these are the things that any market-based mechanism needs if it's in the nature solutions space, ideally. Standards essentially set the rules for all these other parts of the puzzle. There's also standards for standards. In other words, kind of global foundations for integrity across multiple standards. And internationally, we have standards for standards, or at least guidance frameworks for biodiversity markets around the world. And this includes the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, the World Economic Forum, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Ekos has participated in the international integrity foundation building process because we're a founding member of the Biodiversity Credit Alliance and a member of the task force there. Now, across the world, there's several emerging biodiversity credit standards. You'll see a number of them here, and there in the middle you'll notice there's one with our name on it, and that's called the Ekos SD standard. SD stands for Sustainable Development, and this is our biodiversity standard. Now, this is a sustainable development program more broadly, and this standard applies to any of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, although our first program is BioCredita, our program for biodiversity and biodiversity credits. But in future, we plan to roll out a similar framework for financing water quality enhancements, AquaCredita, climate resilience, education, sustainable and community energy, health and well-being, gender equality. There are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the Ekos SD framework covers any of them. But as I said, biodiversity is the first scope that we're focusing on. Now, the BioCredita program sits in the landscape as a crediting scheme in the broader ecosystem of biodiversity credits, and that broader ecosystem includes supply-side actors, demand-side actors, financing actors, Indigenous peoples and local communities, providers of technical support services, governments, media, and so forth. So coming back to BioCredita itself, there are two broad project pathways that projects can pursue. One is simply a verified project where no biodiversity credits are issued, but simply where the project has done its measurement and reporting and it gets verified, and then it's able to supply that verification to any funder who wants to provide performance-based funding for that project. The next pathway is the tradable unit pathway, where there's a couple of extra steps, where after verification you get the issuance of biodiversity credits, and in our system they're called SDUs, Sustainable Development Units, and once the Sustainable Development Units are issued, they can be sold, and then the performance-based revenue come back to the project from those sales. The underpinnings of this program is the quality assurance procedures, and the core elements of that are the Ekos SD standard, the document on the left, also validator and verifier criteria, because verification needs to be undertaken by people with sufficient capability and experience to do an accurate and appropriate and high integrity job, and also projects need to develop or use a validated activity methodology for their project. So let's have a quick look at the standard. In the standard, it's got rules on how you describe a project and its purpose, how you define the boundaries of the project and time and space and maps and things. define the interventions that you're going to undertake that are going to cause some good. For example, here it would be biodiversity conservation of some form. You need to define your theory of change, so to demonstrate that your interventions are likely to lead to a future and have a causal relationship with that targeted future. You need to build or use an activity methodology. So, for example, a project that would be looking after Maui dolphin would have quite a different methodology to a project that's getting rid of invasive predators and weeds and herbivores on a wetland. You develop a baseline scenario, which is business as usual, and show what would happen without the project, and then you justify and quantify the project scenario, and then you compare the baseline with the project, and the difference between the two is the project benefits. You need to demonstrate additionality to make sure the project is not going to happen anyway, or that there's no need for the biodiversity funding for it to happen. We can look at that in a bit more detail later on. There's requirements for leakage, for durability, governance arrangements, the risk management. FPIC means free, prior and informed consent, to make sure that there's a transparent process of mandate setting in the project governance, so that participating projects and communities, including IPLCs, Indigenous peoples and local communities, have a very clear understanding of what's going on, what their role is, what the benefits are, what the risks are. And there's also rules around financial integrity, which relates to how the units are priced appropriately at cost. From the validator verifier perspective, we have validation and validator and verifier criteria. There needs to be a lead validator and verifier in the project for the verification process, and they have to have appropriate capability. And the rules for the BioCredita program are that they have to have at least 5 years experience in non-financial sustainability verification, and they need to have worked with these 3 ISO standards. They can also recruit a subject expert who might have a lot of expertise on Hector's dolphin, for example, or a lot of expertise on wetlands, and they can also have a local expert. For example, if there's a project happening on Māori-owned land, there will be potentially a need for that local expert to be really embedded in the local culture, and in some situations be engaging in a local language. Bearing in mind that this BioCredita program is built in New Zealand, but it will be applicable and is already applicable internationally. The first validator verifier in the program is McHugh and Shaw Limited. They're an independent sustainability assurance provider based in Christchurch, New Zealand, and they have been the validator and verifier for the Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari project. In the methodological sphere, there's 2 broad options for the methodological framework for the project. Option 1 is the verified cause approach. So this is activity based, and for example, the project might focus on a conservation management intervention like invasives control. And if a project uses this approach, they also need to measure beneficial change in the project through time. But the credits are issued on the delivery of those project interventions, in other words, those activities. And that's where the credits are issued on that basis, and then through time the project needs to demonstrate that there is beneficial change happening in that ecosystem. Option 2 is the verified effect approach, which is outcome based, where biodiversity credits are issued on the basis of measured change in the ecosystem itself that you can claim successfully has been caused by your intervention and measured as a percentage of biodiversity uplift of some form. Both of these broad approaches are a feature in the International Biodiversity Credits landscape. Some programs focus on option 2, the verified effect approach. Some focus on option 1, the verified cause approach. The Ekos BioCredita program allows projects to do one or other. The projects have to demonstrate a theory of change, and we've just grabbed an example from a carbon project just to illustrate what this is about. You need to define what your long-term goals are, the long-term outcomes that you want to deliver, then the medium-term outcomes that will cause those, and then the short-term outcomes that are capable of initiating those medium-term outcomes. So it's the buyer that is purchasing these short-term outcomes, and they need to be confident that those short-term outcomes are capable of causing the long-term outcomes that you've got as part of your project vision. Now, you get these short-term outcomes, and each one of them will have need to be caused by a series of activities and outputs. And so projects need to define those activities and outputs. I won't go into detail here, and this is just an example from a carbon project, but the same approach applies. And this is the work and the conservation management undertaken by the project. And then, of course, with each line item of work, each one can have a budget. And this is enabling the project to generate a cost declaration that is then verified by the third-party verifier to make sure you're not hiding a line in there which is all about funding your yacht or some kind of inefficiency or money laundering or anything like that. The project cycle, the first step is to produce a project idea note, a PIN, which is a business case. It's a short form proposal. It's supposed to be a relatively small piece of work which identifies what you're going to do, where it is, just some of the basic information, and an initial cost estimate of what the project cost is going to be. And the project idea note is designed to enable the project to gain a preliminary registration with the Ekos BioCredita program. It also is designed to enable the project to raise capital for the project. So funding sufficient to do full project development, which is the project description, phase 2, and then project establishment and project operations. So the planning stage of the project cycle is a project idea note, which is the short form proposal, and then the project description. The project description is a very detailed business plan and a whole series of documents that demonstrate the project has met all of the criteria of the Ekos SD standard and of the activity methodology, and it becomes the rule book for the project. It's the project description on which the project is validated. And so the validation word means that something is valid. In other words, it complies with a standard. But it's a word for proposals. So it's done before something happens. The word verification is a word that refers to things that have already happened. So verification happens after project establishment and project operations. And verification happens on the basis of monitoring reports. So if we look at this process for Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, the first part of the process was the validation of the project description, and on the left there you've got the cover page of one of the documents in the project description for Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, and on the second document you can see the validation report from McHugh and Shaw Limited, and this defines the boundaries, the description of the project, the methodology, management plan, business plan, governance plan, monitoring plan. Then the next part of the cycle is project verification. Once the project is up and running, you issue two types of reports. Annually, the project delivers deliverables report, so what work we did in that last year, and evidence that you did that work in that last year. And you've got a verification report that where the verifier looks at that evidence and goes and visits the project and interviews the team and then can verify that that has been done. The other part of monitoring and verification is the beneficial change monitoring. Now, all projects have to do this, but it doesn't have to happen annually. It can happen up to 5 yearly, where you do baseline monitoring, in other words, monitoring before the project monitoring, attribution, which is demonstrating that your intervention caused the project benefits, and then the opportunity to look at adaptive measures. If things are not happening the way you originally intended, then you can adapt the project according to that. The next part of the process is the issuance of the biodiversity credits, and this happens on the Ekos SD registry, which is a registry built on blockchain technology that we built over the last few years with a Danish tech company called Trusticate. And this is New Zealand's first full biodiversity credit registry, and what it does is the place where biodiversity credits are born, it's a place where they are tracked, and it's a place where they go to die in the form of being consumed by an end user. So if you click into the registry, you will be able to look at a project and look inside the project. This is the public view of the project, and there's validation reporting, which I described earlier, and those actual reports are sitting on the registry in public view so that anyone can check this out, and they are on the validation portion of the project. Then there is the verification reporting in the project after the verification process has been completed, and that's where you can download the reports and the monitoring reports, for example, in the verification statements. You'll also see there is on the bottom left, just above the word verification documentation, is a smart contract, and so what that does is it locks the documentation that's loaded up to the registry with a digital thumbprint so that nothing can be tampered with or changed without it causing a breach, and this is the benefits of blockchain technology for registry systems. The registry also tracks the transactions. Now, the registry is not a trading platform. It just tracks who owns the credits and who they've been transferred to, and they've been transferred from one registry account owner to another if it's a trade, or the biodiversity credits have been retired for an end user. So this is a record of the retirements. There's 3 pages of these retirements on the registry at the moment. This is just looking at the first page, and you'll see all of the trades and transactions that have happened for Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari. You'll see in the right hand side a certificate column, and you can click on that little box with an arrow in it to open up an end user certificate, and you can click on the little link on the right hand column to get the blockchain proof of that retirement on the registry. If you click on the certificate, then this is what comes up as a digital certificate, which shows what the buyer, the end user, has done. And on the digital certificate, there is that link. There's a link to Backstage in the registry for all that documentation for due diligence purposes, and also the proof of retirement. So next steps. There are 2 paths for engaging with Ekos in developing a biodiversity credit project. Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari is the pilot project, the demonstration project, but now the door is open for anyone else to get involved. The independent path is where a project downloads the webinar recordings, understands how it works, drills into the supporting documentation, reads the Ekos SD standard, develops a methodology, gets it validated by engaging with McHugh and Shaw Limited for that validation process, gets the project description validated, and then launches the project and does its monitoring and its verification reporting, and then issues credits on the registry. So that can happen now with no barrier. Anyone can do that. In fact, anyone anywhere in the world can do that. And most standards in, for example, the voluntary carbon market operate as a passive set of documents, and people just figure it out and get on with it. So that's one approach, the independent path. The accelerator path is where Ekos will provide some support to a group of projects, where we'll announce a call for expressions of interest in August, and we'll be seeking to recruit a number of projects from different regions and different activity types for the pilot phase of the program, to then have a cluster of projects in a program of activities. And we will provide technical support in a group setting, so group training workshops and one-to-one support for the people and the projects on the accelerator path. This is for a fee. This is not provided free of charge either. And if the project doesn't have enough money for that fee, then it can fundraise for that fee from a grant funder, for example. The independent path, Ekos also provides support, but for a consulting fee. Just to bear in mind, Ekos cannot develop projects in this program. We can only support projects who want to develop projects. And this is because we are the quality system in the program. And if we were to develop our own projects in this space, we would be marking our own homework, and that would be a conflict. And the way in which we support projects is similar to the way that other international standards in the carbon market, for example, support the development of carbon projects by providing advice and that kind of service. Just to sum up again, this is us designing a net for you to go money fishing. Projects have to do sales and marketing. Projects still need to find buyers for their credits. That's not our job. Our job is to help build you that net. We will also try and help projects with sales and marketing, but it's really not our fundamental role. It really is the role of the projects. But there we go. And now we'll hand back to you, Josh, and go to the next step.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for the overview as well. I'm just wondering whether we wanted to give Helen an opportunity to have a chat to us about what the experience was like from your perspective, Helen. Would that be worthwhile exploring the process, how that went?
Cool. So hi everyone, and for those of you that don't know anything about Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, we consider ourselves to be the world's largest fully fenced eco sanctuary. We're based in the heart of the Waikato. The land on which we reside is a combination of reserve land. It was originally a reserve in 1914, I think it is. Iwi land, Māori-owned land blocks, private-owned land blocks, got a couple of QE2 covenants in there as well. So for us, one of the gnarly problems we've been trying to overcome is that, one, we're an old growth native, so we're pre kind of 1990 in the carbon environment, and any growth rates that we've had outside what was the original ring fence sit on private land blocks. So, you know, our capacity to draw any ETS benefit is pretty low. And because of our ownership structure, it's really complex. And so we've been looking at ways of trying to bridge that gap, that $700 billion gap that Sean mentioned at the start. I mean, I know each of you out there today feel that gap on an annual, daily, second by second basis, and trying to look for different ways. And this is where Sean and the work that the team at Ekos has done has been massively beneficial. The one thing I'd say is I know it can look really technical and it can look really difficult. You know, Sean's offered up a couple of different pathways today, and I suppose we've had the benefit of being able to work alongside Sean over the last 3 years and really refine the registry, work hand in hand in terms of building some of that documentation and assist in the standard. And so I think, you know, if it were me in your shoes today, my preferred path would be to go into or look to go into more that accelerator environment. Why? Because trying to get your head around exactly what's needed, when it's needed, if it looks right, it is going to take confidence and assurity. And if you've got somebody there that can hold your hand through the process, kind of all the better. Having Ekos beside us, I think, kind of steering us through has meant that my board are really confident. And, you know, I've got 9 board members that I report into. We are a fully fledged and really functional co-governance model. And, you know, being able to provide confidence to the board in terms of the quality has been, I think, the draw card that Ekos has brought to the table. It's that professionalism, the reliability, and what's become a really, really strong partnership. I really want to emphasize what Sean just said, though. You know, it is not Ekos's responsibility to sell these units for you. I mean, they will have customers that may be interested in bundling with carbon. They may be able to go out and find customers along the way. But it really becomes a process that you've got to go out and you've got to find your customer base. And the reality is that the customers across the country, what might be really interested in Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari might be not interested if they were based down in, say, Christchurch and they were really into marine conservation, as an example. So each project will have their funders, they'll have people that love them, and it's about kind of going and extending that network. So as you start looking at this has been something you want to do, my recommendation is that you at the same time actively look to where your market base is, so that you have a sense of, yes, I'm going to go through all of this, I'm going to launch biodiversity credits, and I know who I'm targeting, who my markets are. I've actually already started those conversations kind of in lieu of having the credits there. It just means you're going to hit the ground running in a far better way. Hopefully that explains a little bit about us, and you know, from my experience, and Sean, as I've said, thank you to you and your team for everything that you've achieved with us over the last 3 years. It's hugely exciting to be here, and it's been a really interesting few weeks since we launched. I think one of the big questions that come up a lot is around additionality. It's a terminology that's really common within the carbon space, and people are looking in the biodiversity space as to how that works. So how do we deliver, additionality, if you like, if the ecosystem is already there? We are a mature project. We're not a startup. I thought maybe, Sean, you might be able to expand on that a little bit for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. That's a really good question, and it's a question that we've been asked many times. So the word conservation is a familiar term in biodiversity protection circles, and of course it refers to protecting or conserving something that already exists. And it would decline or degrade or disappear if some form of conservation management is not undertaken. And a really good example of that is invasive species control. If you don't control invasive species, especially, for example, invasive predators, then they're going to eat your vulnerable species in your vulnerable ecosystem. And so even though the ecosystem is already there and the target species that you want to care for are already there, if you don't continue to look after them, then the probability of their population declining and even potentially going extinct either locally or nationally is what we're trying to avoid. So conservation work is additional if there is a genuine threat. If there were no invasive species in New Zealand, then conservation would be easy. It would be a matter of just trying to protect habitats in terms of stopping them being felled, for example, or destroyed. But even when ecosystems have been protected, I guess, from being destroyed, from human interventions, they're still being damaged by invasive species, for example. That's just one example. But there are also projects that will restore ecosystems where they've been heavily degraded in the past, and then you'll rebuild an ecosystem. All right. So either a conservation project or a restoration project, they're both able to be additional. And they are in principle additional. You need to demonstrate additionality in a detailed way in the project proposal. Helen, we've had a number of questions that relate a little bit to what you've talked about additionality, and where people ask, how can a project be additional if the work has already been done and then you measure, report and verify and create biodiversity credits and sell them? Because if that work's already been done, well, it's already been done, so why do you need any money?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure every single person listening to this call today can probably answer that as equally as I can. How we've approached this, and I suppose in some respects this is a little bit of a reconfiguration. Typically people look to the future. Our grant funders do that. So they look and they contract based on future work. And then at the end, we do a report and we show what we've done. How we're doing this is flicking it on its head, and it actually aligns with every other consumer market that is out there in the world. And if I use the example of a plumber, you pay a plumber after they've come to fix your pipes. If the pipes weren't broken before they fixed them, then it wouldn't be considered additional work. But if you've got broken pipes and you need a plumber to come in and fix them, then you get them to come in and do the work. And then at the end of that work, they give you a bill for the repair and you pay for that work. It's no different. Similarly in a bottle of wine, all the work is done to get the wine into the bottle and out to market. And then what we're doing is recovering the cost of that, essentially. So if you look at the payment cycle, perhaps it's a little bit different. We do, a plumber might do a job and bill you the next day. We're going to do the work over a 12-month period, and we're looking then to bill that work for the next year and get that money back in to repay for the work that's already happened. So it is a little bit different. I understand that. But it is a performance-based payment, and it's for conservation management services is what we're looking at. Hopefully that explains that to everybody a little bit clearer. Yeah,
so for example, a plumber might do the job and then send you a bill, and then you typically will pay them the following month on a kind of monthly cycle, this just extends that month to a year. And that year is important because it allows you to do the measurement, reporting and verification annually rather than monthly. So that's where it's slightly different. The time period is a bit longer than a plumber, but it's really no different to wine, and it's also no different to carbon credits in terms of the way that cycle goes.
Thank you, Sean and Helen. So thanks for explaining that particular aspect around additionality, because it is a question that's come up regularly. So thanks for unpacking that a little bit. And also, Sean, thanks earlier on for the overview of BioCredit, of course, and particularly lifting the veil on what's involved in setting up a BioCredita program, and particularly highlighting some of those essential prerequisites that need to be in place. For instance, the ability to demonstrate a buyer's appetite for your product is quite critical, of course, and not the least the organizational skill to be able to navigate and coordinate all those administrative requirements as well. So in short, the impression I've got, it's a very comprehensive and a very robust process. So it's really reassuring being able to kind of see all that in place. Now, some questions have been coming in steadily from the audience, so we'll pivot to that. So if you haven't had a chance to put your question in there yet, please do so, and also use the upvote mechanism, of course, so that we can go on to those questions that are most pressing for the maximum amount of people as well. So let's move into that space, and we've obviously got Sean and Helen both being able to give their perspective. So I think the first question we'll navigate to is from Kane Duncan, I think perhaps representing Fonterra. Kia ora, just wondering about the requirement around project boundaries and whether additional projects can come into a scheme at a later date. For instance, a project boundary be larger than the initial area where the biodiversity uplift is occurring. I'm wondering whether, perhaps Sean, you might be best placed to provide some insight there. What would you say to Kane in this instance?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Fantastic. That's really good then. That's a nice, clear, simple answer. What we'll do then is just to get to as many questions as possible. There are a couple of questions related to the methodology approach, so the verified cause, the verified effect cause. And the first one is, I think it was from Sofol Chun. How could you perhaps explain a little bit more, and once again, maybe Sean, you might be best placed to this, how that beneficial change is actually measured for option 1, so that would be the verified cause, and how to measure percentage biodiversity uplift for option 2. So I suppose either scenarios, how would they be measured? What could you perhaps explain a little bit more there?
Okay, so for verified cause approach, there's 2 types of monitoring. One is to monitor the deliverables. So if part of the deliverables is invasives control, not only do you have to have an invasives control plan and show that you've spent money on invasives control, you've also got to prove that the staff responsible for that invasives control went out and did that work, rather than wave goodbye at the office and then went round to the pub and then came back at the end of the day saying, wow, I killed a lot of possums today. So there's technologies available to do, for example, georeferenced photographs and GIS tracking of people's movements and things, and you provide that to prove that you did that work. So that's the deliverables reporting. And when it comes to beneficial change reporting, the way this is done is to set up a baseline study, so a study at the beginning of the project, and then carry out monitoring through time. And typically that requires a few years between the baseline study and then the study that looks at the consequences of the interventions. And it's up to the project to define that methodology. Okay, the project has to, and it's going to be different for different types of project. And this is simply one of the requirements in the standard. There's not going to be, Ekos, we're not going to design all of the possible methodologies for doing this for different activity types. That's up to projects to do. But once that methodology has been validated, it then goes on the Ekos website and is available to anybody. So if somebody's done a methodology to protect geckos on a rock in Central Otago, then that methodology becomes available for anyone else who wants to protect geckos on rocks in other parts of the country. So the ways that beneficial change monitoring is starting to happen these days in the biodiversity monitoring space includes things like eDNA. the sampling of water and rivers to find out what the diversity of DNA, in other words, the diversity of species that you can detect from that water monitoring for eDNA, insect counts, soil surveys, bird counts, these kinds of things. So again, it's up to the project to develop a methodology that is appropriate to the project and that is capable of capturing a measure of beneficial change. It's not up to us. It just needs to be validated to our standard.
Thank you, Sean. A related question by Sarah Yarrow then, and that relates once again to those two different approaches. Is it possible to swap from one to the next at some point
Yes,
in the future?
absolutely. In fact, the verified cause approach is designed to help projects get started, because you need a cash flow year on year to do your conservation work. If you have to wait 5 years to prove that your beneficial change has happened as a result of 5 years of work, and you were only able to issue biodiversity credits after that 5 years of work had happened, then it's going to be quite risky for you to do that 5 years of work before the credits are issued. And so the verified cause approach enables you to get biodiversity conservation management credits issued annually, and then through time, as you're monitoring, which you have to do anyway for verified cause approach, you still have to monitor the beneficial change. And as that starts to demonstrate that the basket of metrics that you're using to measure the status of biodiversity, and then seeing that basket of metrics change through time, then you can pivot to the verified effect approach if you want to. And the question about whether you would choose one approach or another, it's kind of up to you. We don't mind which approach somebody uses, but I think ultimately, at the end of the process, you want to sell these things. And if the buyer is happy or prefers one, then use that one. It's something that we don't need to control or limit, but it also means that projects that are already using a basket of metrics approach can then incorporate that project into this program.
Nice to have that flexibility in there as well as things change and morph over time for particular projects. I am going to go over to a question that's covering kind of two questions really, one by Rachel Pates and an anonymous attendee as well. So Rachel's asking about whether the system would be available to be done on public land. In this particular context, she's referring to as in urban areas where you don't get the opportunity to work on large tracts of private land, but making big improvements in reserves possibly, and then someone else echoing that maybe in the more rural kind of estate in terms of maybe public dock land as well. What are the possibilities there? We've mainly talked about private land probably.
Thank you for that question. It's a very, very good question, because it's about who should be financing conservation on publicly owned land. So who owns that land is the ratepayer or the taxpayer. So to be very clear, the Ekos SD standard and the BioCredita program is primarily for private land. If there is a government-owned land situation, and especially more likely local government, where there is a genuine inability to fund some sort of activity from, say, ratepayers, because maybe ratepayer the rating levels in a region or a district are already at their maximum, and they're already funding a lot of conservation projects anyway, but this one is additional to what's already being funded, then we would consider that on a case-by-case basis. As for Crown land, government-owned land, on dock land, for example, we would be very cautious about, and again, look at this on a case-by-case basis, but we're very cautious about this because what we don't want to do is create a situation that allows a government to starve the Department of Conservation of funding, which it's government-owned land. The nation owns this land, and the nation needs to look after it, and the government, whichever is the government of the day, needs to be looking after the dock estate. And it shouldn't be up to the private sector, in our view, to do that. The private sector can contribute to conservation on the dock estate, and this already happens in parts of the country. I'm thinking of Project Yanzoon as a good example in Abel Tasman National Park. In certain situations where it's clear the government can't afford this, then we would look into this. But the other risk is if government gets involved, it might flood the market with lots and lots of biodiversity credits from government projects and then make it much more difficult for that person who wants to look after that gecko population on a rock in Southland or in Central Otago, because there's just huge supply of government credits. So this is why for public land we will look at it on a case-by-case basis as a standard setter.
Great, thanks for highlighting that, Sean. Kind of makes me think a little bit of kind of unrelated, but with funding being withdrawn from things like ambulances and things like that, it's kind of who takes responsibility for that kind of realm, really, and whether there's a risk that might that kind of process might actually continue. So, question from Claire Jones. She's got two questions actually, and it's really around when can I think you've answered this already actually, but when can prospective project suppliers start applying to start the process? And I think you talked about the accelerator process. And
so you can say today,
yeah.
There's no barrier. So on the Ekos website, so go to the homepage, and then on the homepage, near the top of the homepage, there's a link, a button which says, learn more about biodiversity credits. So click on that, and that will take you to the BioCredita pages. And then near to the top of that page is at the very top, you can go and buy biodiversity credits, and anybody out there who wants to test drive what it feels like to buy some, please go and buy some anytime soon, because Helen will really appreciate that. But if you scroll down just very slightly, there's a series of buttons there that take you to a brochure. There's supporting documentation and the registry. If you click on the supporting documentation, that'll take you to the standard, the validation and verification criteria. There's an existing activity methodology that Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari that was used with Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari's project, and people can replicate that. These methodologies will be refined through time as well. But also you'll get some document templates. So the project idea note document template is sitting there. It's just, you can download it as a Word document. The project description template is sitting there. You can download that as a Word document. So have a look at those supporting documents and just get on with it.
Brilliant, thanks. Great to have that option here right now, of course. Kind of carrying on with Claire's thoughts really around this. Obviously, we're trying to create awareness at the moment. If in the scenario where we kind of get inundated by project applications, is there using the healthcare metaphor again, is there a triaging we would apply at Ekos? You've already lifted the veil earlier on about what are good
question.
What are good processes in place, and how could someone really put something together?
Yeah, the triage is the validation and verification protocol. So we don't mind if there's if a million projects want to use this system, go for it. We're not a barrier to that. Each project simply has to get validated and verified by a validator verifier who has been approved by the program. And at the moment, there's one validator verifier in the program that has been approved, and that's McHugh & Shaw Limited. And so that's that. We're not a barrier to a million projects. The barrier is just engaging that validation verification process. If McHugh & Shaw suddenly get to the point where they're overwhelmed and we need to recruit another validator verifier, then we'll do that. But the more important barrier would be, well, how many buyers are out there that are able to buy these things? And so that would be a limit on the million projects, because each project has to demonstrate demand for the biodiversity credits that they want to sell. And so each project has to get out there and hustle and have a sales and marketing component of project development. Because remember, this is a commercial activity, and it's a wee bit like farming organic potatoes. It's you need to find your market, and you need to do sales and marketing. And if you don't do that, and if you can't demonstrate that there is demand, then you won't be allowed to issue credits. Because imagine a project is allocated a certain volume of credits for a given vintage, like 2024 vintage. Imagine you're allocated 20,000 units, and each unit is 1/100th of a hectare. They're allocated, but they're not yet credits that you can trade. In order to get them issued, you have to have a proof of demand. You have to provide that sale and purchase agreement or that supply contract in order to actually issue the credits for trading. Projects can issue double what they've got proven demand for. So if you've got proven demand for 1,000 units, then you can issue 2,000 units. Okay, and so this forces projects to get serious about the commercial side of the activity right at the beginning of the process. And then a person might say, well, how am I going to fund that? Well, you need to build your budget. This is the budget for the project. Build in a sales and marketing component and a unit monetization effort and cost into the project. Then that's going to then influence the unit price, because the unit price is designed to cover all of these costs. And if you don't have that capability yourself, then get some advice from Helen. She knows how to do this, and they've got people who support her and their marketing program. But there's also no shortage of marketing consulting firms around the country who are very happy to help you sell your biodiversity credit projects, and they will help you develop a budget for the work that they can support you in doing. So that's really how that needs to happen. And so, yeah, we would love it if there was 1 million projects.
Thanks, Sean. You mentioned Helen before and her expertise as well. That kind of pivots us nicely into the question from Mark Stringer. Helen, what's been your experience in trying to market and ultimately sell the credits for Sanctuary Mountain as well? Would you be able to, and kind of supplementary to what Sean's just shared as well?
For sure. So anybody going on the Ekos website, and Sean showed it in his presentation, you will see what will look like traded and sold credits, and what we've done in order to win the hearts and minds of some of our traditional funders if we've written down some of the credits into their name. And that's a way of transitioning some of the mindset, I suppose, around credits. So that's part number one. It also shows proof of demand that Sean just talked about. So it's been able to say, I'm not going out to market having sold none. I'm going out to market having sold half my credits potentially through traditional grant funders, and we're writing them down in that name. They'll get all of the proof, the evidence, and the certificates, which is pretty I suppose it's a good way of doing it. Then let's talk about new market. And Sean and I have launched this. I mean, we launched the original credits 3 years ago, but it was a credit program that was based on essentially a background of Excel and a good relationship with Profile Group that has stood the test of time. It's given us an opportunity to see how they would monetize the credits and how they would actually transition that into a product offering. And now what we've done after kind of 3 years of development and, a lot of out-of-pocket costs from Sean particularly, I've been enrolled for nearly 2 years, and Sean and I have been working over the last 2 years to kind of get it to where it is. And so what we've done now is we've launched it out to broader than just Profile Group APL. We have essentially, in the last 2 weeks, in my view, launched an iPhone. We've got something that nobody knows they need, but everybody absolutely will want. And that's how I'm looking at it. So we're creating a new market in the same way as, 20, however many years it was since the iPhone launched. Nobody at the time of an iPhone launch understood what it was, how it worked, or that ultimately they'd become so hyper dependent on it. And I kind of think that's where we are now. We're at the starting of that. Being the first is massively exciting. It's also a huge responsibility and a challenge, because we're having conversations with people that don't understand it. And an example of that for me is really getting people's head around what is it that we're selling and how do you monetize it. And look, the best way I can describe kind of the sales process in my head is that we're selling for every cup of coffee that you buy. Rather than paying $5, you're paying $5.01 for a cup of coffee, and that 1 cent goes towards biodiversity credit. And now you have a biodiversity enriched product. I can see a time in the not distant future where you will have biodiversity enriched houses, cars, insurance, banking. I can see that happening, and where consumers will happily pay an extra 1 cent, 2 cents, or 3 cents in a transaction in order to buy something that is biodiversity enriched. And that's what we've seen with Profile Group, is they've been able to create biodiversity enriched products. You pay a little bit more, it writes off biodiversity credits. So we are creating a new market, and that means that as exciting as I know that this sounds for everybody, and it is exciting, please don't underestimate it's hard work. And it's hard work because you're creating something new, you're selling something new, and we've, as conservation projects, we follow a very traditional approach of donations, of sponsors, of grant funders, and in some cases, tourism, education. This is another piece of flax, if you like, that we've got. It's another element that we weave in, but I don't necessarily think that it will, right now at least, replace. Maybe in the future, yes, but we are still new. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and I can also add to that, like, we've been monetizing these things with several different private sector buyers that have come in this new market. Profile Group was the first, but there are others, and you just need to look on the registry to find which ones have already purchased. They've either been purchased outright just as straight biodiversity credits. Some of them have been purchased in bundles with carbon credits. So imagine a bag of lollies where one of the lollies is a carbon credit and 3 jelly beans are in there, and the 3 jelly beans are the biodiversity credits. And carbon buyers like this idea because it's flavouring up the carbon part of the puzzle for those who are in the carbon market. So the carbon market is an example of a value chain, and the biodiversity credits that are bundled with the carbon credits is an example of biodiversity enriched carbon credits. So we're already doing that and we're continuing to do that. And Helen and I are going to carry on marketing the project and win more and more buyers. It's just to kind of watch this space. And the more demand that we can generate, the more that will stimulate this market. But also, that's another thing. We do need to stimulate the market, which is why we need to talk about this. Target environment, social and governance reporting for businesses so they can just come and buy biodiversity credits off the shelf. But this is the task for your creative innovation in the same way that Helen and her team have been creatively innovating in their fundraising.
If I could just add before you go, Josh, one other thing, and this is where we all have to think bigger than New Zealand, and we need to look internationally. And it's where I see Ekos and Sean really providing the benefit. Last year we had what we would call a whale, Sean, wanting to invest millions and millions of US dollars into conservation in New Zealand. But we as Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, don't get me wrong, I would have taken that money and run with it, but we were way too small an offering. So for me, having many conservation projects in the registry actually active in market provides us all an opportunity which none of us can tap into at the moment. And that is the significant global investors that have big coin that want to invest in New Zealand conservation, but we're all individually too small to be appealing, but collectively as a bundle, we are really appealing. And that opens up a whole market we've not even tapped into yet. So it's the reason, Sean and I had a great conversation yesterday about when would we bring new entrants into the program, and I'm like, as soon as physically possible, to start looking and hunting for those whales, if you like.
Brilliant, Helen. Hey, thank you. I am mindful that we are running a little bit over time, but obviously there's lots to explore. Thank you so much for the additional questions that we've had as well. I do apologise we haven't been able to answer all of them, but we will endeavour to do so in future as well. So
yeah, we'll turn them into written answers and send them out to everybody. So don't worry about that. We've captured the questions and we will answer them all.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Helen. Thanks for your insights. And thank you for everyone who's joined us here at lunchtime. We hope you feel more informed and inspired about the expanded possibilities BioCredita brings to enabling more vital conservation work to take place. It is worth noting that there is a lot of documentation on the Ekos website, which will answer many of the questions that have arisen. And as Sean was saying, we will send out the answers to all of the questions that we've received in the webinars so far. So they'll be emailed out to all the webinar participants and be made available on the frequently asked questions on the Ekos website. And as we mentioned before, to learn more and get involved, you can visit the Ekos website, of course, and look for the homepage link to the biodiversity credits to learn more about BioCredita and to be able to support amazing projects like Sanctuary Mountain at Maungatautari. For the recordings, go to the news and publications option on the top of the line on the Ekos website, I should say. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars. In fact, we've got one next Tuesday, same time slot, again lunchtime, and we're catering for investors interested in biodiversity projects. And just to clarify, with investors, we're not meaning buyers, but we're meaning those organizations and people who will provide the startup capital. So have a great day, everyone. Stay warm. Mā te wā from Ekos and the rest of the team.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.